Good evening. I'm super excited to be here and at the same time a little bit nervous. More than anything though, I'm really curious to see how many people are interested in hearing about a way that's pretty much guaranteed that you can make a positive difference in your families, in your communities, in your world really. Fantastic. You're all in the right place. And I can say that whether or not you raised your hand, because if you raised your hand or didn't raise your hand just now, it really had nothing to do with what I said. It actually had more to do with whatever it was you said to yourself. So some of you are looking at me a little confused, but I can guarantee that some sort of conversation happened in your head right before you either raised your hand or didn't raise your hand. And for some of you, you're aware that I didn't ask you to raise your hand. You just heard me say that I was curious. So you're definitely here because you want to make a difference. You're definitely here because you want to make the world a better place. And at the same time, you knew I didn't say raise your hand, so you're not going to. Other people possibly raised their hand because they thought, oh, poor thing, she's nervous. We should raise our hand so that she feels better. There are other people who possibly are still thinking about whether or not you should raise your hand because really, you don't know who I am. And you don't know what I'm going to talk about, and you don't know what you might be signing up for if you do raise your hand. So some of you are still thinking about it, and others just raise your hand because other people were raising their hand. Or because you're just so excited to be here and making a difference, whatever. Sure, I'm in. So those conversations happen all the time, and they're going to happen at least for the next 15 minutes, 10 minutes, however long I'm up here. So I'm going to make a suggestion, which is that while I'm talking, as much as I want you to listen to me, that you also pay a little bit closer attention to the conversations that are happening in your head, and listen to yourself, if not more, or at least the same amount that you're listening to me. So can you do that with me? Yeah. Right on. Okay, so now I really do want you to raise your hands. And I'd like to see by a show of hands how many people have ever made a mistake. Like you took a wrong turn, bought the wrong milk, answered a question wrong on a test. Right on. Okay, and how many of you have ever made a bad choice? Like maybe you chose a bad relationship, maybe bad career choice. Fantastic. And so this last one, you don't necessarily have to raise your hands, but I just want you to take a minute and think about if there's anything all the way up until tonight, anything in your life that you've ever done or that you've ever said, or maybe just something that you thought about or wanted that you hope nobody ever finds out about. Okay, now hold that thought for a moment because I want to introduce you to Tiffany. Tiffany is a manager at a local bakery chain. She was hired as an entry-level sales clerk and quickly got promoted to manager. And as a manager, she worked hand in hand with the head chef of that bakery and created this gluten-free product line for their store. Tiffany is a member of Toastmasters. She attends church regularly. She is a single mother of 2, and she's recently decided to go back to school to finish her degree in culinary arts. I met Tiffany a couple of years ago really because of her commitment to her own education. As Matt said, I facilitate classes in the prison system, cognitive restructuring and emotional literacy classes, and Tiffany was one of my students. Because a little known fact, again, about Tiffany is that she's also an ex-convict. So this might be one of those moments that little conversations start happening in the back of your head, and you go like, oh, I wonder what Tiffany did. And I wonder where Tiffany works. And I wonder if I know Tiffany. So before that question gets out of hand, let's go back to a minute ago when I asked you to think of the things in your life that you hope nobody ever finds out about. The skeletons in your closet, so to speak. And let's think about if you were to go home from this wonderful evening tonight, and suddenly all of those stories were being discussed on the evening news. Or you woke up tomorrow morning and they were plastered across the front page of the paper. Or worse yet, if somebody who knew all of the deepest, darkest secrets that you hope nobody would ever find out, used that information to update your About Me info on your Facebook profile. And now all of a sudden, all of the things that you wished nobody would ever find out had become your identity. Well, this is the kind of stuff that I deal with the men and women who are in my class all the time. Some of them are dealing with, for the first time, being judged for the things that they've done, or the person that they've become by their families and by their communities. And others of them have judgments placed on them long time ago. And so now the role of being a convict or being a criminal is just something that they've become very familiar with. Either way, whether it's their first time or their 10th time in prison, the work that I do with them is the same. And it's work on what I believe is each of our kuleana. And I believe that all of us, every single one of us, all of them, all of us, that our kuleana is to live genuinely. And when I say we, I mean me too, because for a lot of them, coming to prison is the first time that they really take a look at their lives and how genuine it is. And the way that I've found works best is that no matter, like I said, whether they're there for the first time or the 10th time, the work that we do consists of answering 2 questions. And it's questions that even I ask myself all the time, which are, who am I and what do I want? And for me, going to prison was a very different situation because I go voluntarily, but the impact of the lessons that I've learned there have been just as great, I would imagine. I remember a few years back when I first started working and I was just volunteering at the women's prison, and I was walking out to my car one day, and a coworker of mine came up to me and said, "Hey, I think that lady's in your class." And I said, "What lady?" And he started to describe this court case. Well, it was a matter of like a few seconds in that I knew exactly which court case he was talking about, and I knew for sure that that lady was in my class. The reason why I knew was because I remembered when this case came out on the news and in the newspaper, what I mostly remember is the way that I judged her, because it was harsh. Because the things that she had done were to children. And I grew up in a family of a lot of children. So as far as I was concerned, any crime that was committed against or made to harm or hurt children was absolutely unacceptable. I also grew up in a household where if you did something wrong, you got hit. That's how you learned your lesson. And so, of course, my first reaction was, this lady hurt somebody, so somebody else should go hurt her. Makes perfect sense, right? Like how children get yelled at to be quiet by their parents. It made perfect sense to me. Like, I didn't want to be the one to be doling out the punishment, but I knew for sure somebody was supposed to hurt that lady so that she would understand it wasn't okay to hurt people. The difference was that that lady was now a woman in my class. And she was a woman who had done some really incredibly healing work on herself. And she was willing to do the work to answer the kinds of questions like, who am I and what do I want? And one of the things we learned about who she was that from the time she was 4 years old, she was also very badly abused. And so now here she was, 40 years later, out in the world, trying to prove that she was in control of her life, and she was powerful, and that she had something to say, and people were gonna listen. And so having learned these new things about her, as I drove home, I wondered what it was gonna be like when I was back in class with her. Because I knew I wasn't gonna be able to pretend like I didn't know who she was anymore. Up until then, I normally didn't ask my students why they were there. I didn't ask about what crime they had committed. And I told them that the reason why was because I was more concerned about where they were going in their lives, what they wanted, and how they got there and what they had done didn't really matter to me. But what I understood now was part of the reason why I didn't want to know was because it helped me maintain separate worlds. I could live in this world, and I could work in this world. And the two never had to cross paths. But now all of a sudden, they did. So I was really curious to see what it was gonna be like when I was in my classroom again with her, with that lady, who had now become somebody that I really cared very deeply about. And I'm grateful to say that when I was standing in front of her, in the safety of my classroom, in the sanctity of, the place that she and I had done work together, the judgments didn't matter anymore, because she wasn't that lady in the newspaper. And I wasn't in the environment where I cared more about what other people thought than what she thought. I had had a connection now to this lady, which meant more to me than what the news told me I should feel, or what my community necessarily thought that I should feel. And for me, that was a really big personal win, because I got to see in that moment that the work that I was doing was more than just a job. This was suddenly my purpose. Because when I asked myself the same questions I asked them, which is who am I and what do I want? One thing is I'm a mother. And I'm a mother who wants my daughter to grow up in the best world possible. And what I know is, if that's what I want to be true, I have to do something about it. I'm also a well-educated woman who's had many years of experience in personal development and human potential. And what I know about that is that there's goodness in every human being. What I also know is I am a human being, and at my core, I am pure and certain, unshakable love. And my ability to bring that into the work that I do is a gift. And what I want, why I started this work in the first place, is to put an end to generational incarceration, which is stories get handed down from generation to generation to generation, and the same way, if you grew up in a family of doctors, you might think you're supposed to be a doctor, or you grew up in a family of farmers, you might think you're supposed to be a farmer. Well, the same thing happens for families of violence or families of drug addicts. They grow up thinking that's what they're supposed to do. And so the problem we have now is there are multiple generations of families who are incarcerated at the same time for the same stuff. Like, oh, so-and-so was in my class. Oh, my grandma took your class, or my auntie took your class, or this is my cousin. And so what I want is to see an end at some point to generational incarceration. And I know that the work that I did with that lady who became the woman that I cared about made a difference in that, because what she wanted at the end of that class was not necessarily forgiveness for herself or not to be released from prison early. What she wanted was for those kids who she had victimized to understand that they didn't deserve what she did to them. She wanted them to grow up knowing that what they deserved was to be loved, so that, if nothing else, the abuse that she had endured and then passed on to them would not be passed on again. And so that's why I believe that our kuleana, each of us, no matter where we're at or where we came from, is to live genuinely. Because I see so many benefits of it, not just to myself and to our community, but people like Tiffany who can come out of a situation like that and find a career that they're passionate about, and then create new things for the rest of us to enjoy. Or someone like that lady who became this woman who understands now what love is really about and what forgiveness is, and wants the same thing that I want, which is to end generational incarceration. It's even something as simple as a lady, Jem, who was in my class, who 2 years ago, she came into my class, and when I asked her what her name was, she said, Monster. And I said, okay. And then she came back about a year later, because she didn't finish my class, and she left, and she came back. And she came back very committed to finishing my class, and I said, oh, you're back. So everybody gonna call you Monster? And she said, no. My name is Jem, and that's who I wanna be from now on. So it's the little wins that get me really excited about me being able to live genuinely, them being able to live genuinely, and the difference that it makes for all of us. Personally, I know that it's brought me great benefits in that I have a really great relationship with my teenage daughter, because as she struggles through figuring out who she is or what her place is in the world, I'm very confident that my job is not to find that answer for her, but that in order to support her, I can be a really solid example of what it means to live genuinely. Not live according to what other people's expectations of me are, or the limits of what other people's judgments of me are. I was just talking to somebody earlier about how a couple of months ago, when I was first asked to be a speaker at this, I thought, no, I'm not one of those people. I'm not somebody who talks about what I do to anybody. And then I had to go home and ask myself those questions again. Well, who am I? And what do I want? Because if I'm not the girl who would do a talk like this, then who am I? And lo and behold, the answer came back that, okay, after all, I think I am one of those girls who might get up and talk about what I'm doing. So, my challenge for you tonight would be not just to keep listening to those little conversations in your head, but to start more conversations. And it could be with questions as simple as, who am I and what do I want? Or they could be a little bit deeper, a little bit more poetic even. Maybe the question you ask yourself is, what am I passionate about? Or how deeply do I want to love? What is the legacy that I want to leave behind? Whatever the question is for you, I would challenge you from tonight on to ask those questions and keep asking them until you get the answer. And then as you get the answer, turn those answers into actions, and then go out into the world and commit to making your life a really authentic expression of the phenomenal self that you are. Thank you.